Hey everyone, and welcome back to PSA. If you are new here, I'm Tanya, and if you've been following along, you already know that we like to keep it real around here. So I recently got a DM from somebody asking about family planning, wondering if we are going to have another baby, worrying about what it means to raise an only child, and feeling the weight of their future decisions, all of our future decisions essentially. And honestly, I get it. It's so easy to feel like we need to have our entire lives mapped out, to be 10 steps ahead, to plan for every what if. But here's what I've learned. God equips us for each season, but not for every season all at once. And when we try to plan too far ahead, we carry burdens that were never even ours to hold. So I want to talk to you about a couple things. The first being the burden of over-planning versus the freedom of just trusting God. We live in a world that tells us to plan for everything, literally everything, and have a 5-year plan, and a retirement plan, and a backup plan for your backup plan. And I'm not saying that planning is bad. Wisdom in itself is biblical. But when we try to control things that only God can orchestrate, we end up being exhausted. We end up being anxious and overwhelmed. And Jesus literally tells us in Matthew 6 verse 34, he says, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Ain't that the truth? This verse isn't saying don't be responsible. It's saying stay present. God gives daily grace for daily challenges. He equips us when the time comes, but not months or years before. So if you're trying to figure out your whole life in just one sitting, take a breath. Take a breath. God is already in your tomorrow, and He's working things out before you even get there. The scriptures say, "Will He not even feed the birds?" When I start feeling overwhelmed by what's next, I always go back to Matthew 6:26. And it says, "Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" Because birds don't stress about what their next meal is or where it's coming from. They don't sit around making spreadsheets about how many worms they need for the month. They just trust that their Creator is going to provide. And what Jesus is saying here, He's saying, if God cares so much for the birds, then how much more is He going to care for you? We have to stop living like orphans, as if God isn't already making a way for us. He is not withholding from you. He is not leaving you to figure things out alone. He is not ignoring your future. He is preparing it. The same way that He provides for the birds, He's going to provide for you and for me and for your family and for your future. There are seasons where trusting God, it doesn't really feel inspiring or exciting. It just feels exhausting. Because when you're anxious and you're burnt out and you're running on empty, it's really hard to believe that God's going to make a way when you can't even see a path forward. But here is the thing. God does some of His best work in the wilderness. In Isaiah 43:19, it says, "See, I am doing a new thing." I love this passage. "Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." Now, wilderness seasons, they feel dry and empty and directionless, but God is still working, even when you and I can't see it. You don't have to figure out the whole journey. You just have to take the very next step. And even when you're tired, and even when you feel like you've got nothing left, just trust that He's going to meet you there. And we all know that comparison is the thief of joy. So we've got to stay in our lane. One of the biggest reasons why we get ahead of God is comparison. We're looking at everything else that people are doing. We see other people having babies and then getting married and buying houses and buying bigger houses and seemingly just figuring it all out. And we feel like we're falling behind. But comparison is the thief of joy. It makes us question the very thing that God is doing in our lives instead of trusting in His timing. God's plan for someone else is not His plan for you. Their time is not your time, and that has to be okay. In Proverbs 4:25-26, it says, let your eyes look straight ahead. And I'm preaching to myself. Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths of your feet, and be steadfast in all of your ways. In other words, stay in your lane. What God has for you is yours. If you're always looking at what everybody else is doing, you're going to miss what He's doing right in front of you. And I promise you, His plan is always better than our plan. So we're going to look at some biblical examples of how God provides in the right seasons. And this is how God has always worked. He doesn't give all the answers all at once. He gives us enough for each and every season. So if we look at the Israelites in the wilderness, God didn't give them a year's supply of manna. He gave them daily bread. If you want to read Exodus 16 verse 4, you're going to find that. If we look at Abraham's journey, God didn't tell him every detail up front. He just said, go to the land, I will show you. That's in Genesis 12. If we look at Mary, the mother of Jesus, she didn't know every detail of how raising the Son of God would unfold, but she trusted. And if God provided for them, and you and I are no different, He will provide for you. And maybe not with all the answers, but with exactly what you need for today. You know what trusting God looks like? It looks like surrendering your timeline. And what do we do instead of stressing about the future? We're supposed to surrender the timeline. In Psalm 37, verse 5, it says, commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this. Your job is to be faithful with what's in front of you today. God's job is to handle what's next. So whether you're thinking about having another child or starting a new career or moving to a new city, or you're just trying to figure out your life, trust that God has already made a way. He has never failed you, and He's not going to start now. You don't have to have every detail figured out. I'll say it again, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to trust Him for this very season. And when the next one comes, He's going to equip you then too. So, what season is God asking you to trust Him in? If this message spoke to you, I want to talk about it in the comments. I want to know what's an area where you need to trust God's timing instead of trying to force things ahead of schedule. Because God knows I can relate to this. And if this encouraged you, just like it encouraged me sharing it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because I promise you that somebody else needs this reminder today too. And until next time, let's love more, and I'll see you at the next PSA. Trusting God, huh? It's a daily muscle that we have to exercise. If you enjoyed this message, just like I enjoyed preaching to myself, then definitely share it with the first person that comes to mind. We have an entire playlist of messages just like this for you and those in your life. And we'll see you in the next one.